I'm joined now by California Congressman Ted Lieu. He serves on the House Judiciary Committee, as well as former federal prosecutor Harry Litman. Thank you both for being here. I start with you. What does it tell you that Bob Mueller is using the subpoena threat?
Well, it tells me that things at least reached something of a stalemate. I don't think it's a permanent stalemate. I think, in part, the threat of a subpoena is meant to keep the talks, or to make the talks revive, because the reports we have really are now a month old, and things had sort of come to a stall. But I think they will return. Yes, he has played that card. I don't think it's quite a thunderbolt from heaven. Everyone's always known that's part of the rules of engagement here. And so he said the words and pretty much made it clear. And I think that's just meant to say, let's get serious here, guys. Do you want to try to work something out or not?
Now, Trump's former advisor, Steve Bannon, is speaking out on this. As you know, he is a widely respected legal expert. No, he's not. Yeah. But he is a political guy with some input on the White House. This is what he says, quote, "Cobb was a mistake, totally incompetent, in over his head, obsessed with this radical fantasy of waiving executive privilege. It was truly stupid. Realized there would never be, could never be, a special relationship with Mueller." I would say what Bannon doesn't know about the law, he makes up for in what he knows about political brawling. And if this is an administration that is not looking to be saved by the facts, the way you would sometimes when you have an innocent client and you say, I'm really confident about putting all the facts out there, they're turning to a brawl. What does that view from Bannon on the brawl say to you and then the Congressman Lieu?
So I agree. First of all, bringing in Flood, he's the first guy remotely capable of having the kind of fight that you described. It's not just aggressive, but the chops to bring a court challenge from the district court to the Supreme Court. He's heads and shoulders more capable than anyone has been in that regard. So it looks like they're focused on a possible court battle, and they're actually bringing in as you say, conciliary.
On the subpoena issue, Nixon lost, as you know, in the Supreme Court on a similar argument that he couldn't be subpoenaed for the tapes. Bill Clinton ultimately testified. But I want to talk about the politics of this rather than just the legal issues. Politically, if Donald Trump really wants to sell to the American people that he did nothing wrong, then what does he have to hide? Why doesn't he just go and talk and do the interview? If he doesn't want to do the interview, it suggests that he's trying to hide information. And in terms of executive privilege, they never waived it. They actually had witnesses invoke it all the time in these various committees by saying they're going to invoke executive privilege. They never did, but then they wouldn't answer the questions that congressional committees asked.
So, and you were, of course, a part of that process as a member of Congress. Did you think that they effectively have invoked executive privilege by that manner?
They were not invoking executive privilege. It's just that the Republican-controlled Congress was not calling them out on it, and they were able to answer only the questions that they wanted to answer.
So, yeah, your view is they use that essentially as a dodge.
Absolutely.
Yeah. When you mention U.S. v. Nixon, this goes to a big question. And Harry, are you comfortable getting with me?
Yes, I am.
All right, let's do it. Okay. I'm kidding.
Sure,
this is important.
Shall we make our voices slower?
This is important. Yeah. U.S. v. Nixon, everyone knows in at least the broad strokes, Nixon lost because people remember things went to the Supreme Court and he was out. So if you're worried about presidents breaking the law, that seems to stand for something good. But it's more complex because U.S. v. Nixon can either stand for the general notion that presidents aren't above the law, okay, or it can stand for a much narrower legal principle that when Congress creates a different mechanism to hold the president accountable, as they did then with a congressionally authorized prosecutor, that can be taken all the way up to the Supreme Court, and you can get that evidence, right? Whereas there is an argument on Trump's side that this is different because it is a different type of prosecutor, and they would argue this is essentially a debate within the executive branch, and they could argue that they could win even with U.S. v. Nixon, your view.
First, I'm a nerd. This is exciting to me. I'm not bored at all. I agree completely. And there's the other distinction, which is U.S. versus Nixon. Nixon was brought to heel in terms of producing evidence. Clinton v. Jones brought to heel in terms of a civil deposition.
Civil deposition.
U.S. v. Trump would be the first time anyone ever says you've got to show up for a criminal trial and testify where you're really on the line and your presidency is on the line. So he'll have arguments to make. I think at the end of the day, the court will side against him, but people who are seeing this as open and shut, I think, are overreading U.S. v. Nixon and the Clinton case.
Which is striking coming from you, I think. I mean, let me do this. this, I want to get your views as well, Congressman. I also want to add in another special legal expert voice we have here, which is former U.S. Attorney Guy Lewis, who worked with Bob Mueller, James Comey, and Rod Rosenstein at the DOJ, so knows some of these players. Let me start with your analysis of the conversation we were just having. On the one hand, U.S. v. Nixon would seem like bad news for a president on the run. On the other hand, it is, as Mr. Lippman was just explaining, arguably narrower than some of the issues that would be presented in a U.S. v. Trump.
Yeah, Harry, I think, is 100% right on this, in that there will be a fight. I do not think that these changes, especially in Trump's attorney today, are indicative of anything but, okay, let's gear up, let's put our helmets on, let's suit up, and we're going to fight this thing. Look, you look at this president's past history, litigative history. I mean, he's no stranger to litigation. And how many times do you see him reaching across the aisle saying, you know what, let's find a middle ground. Let's have some consensus here. It's not going to happen. He's going to fight this every step of the way. And I think this thing
so
is
you,
gonna,
sir, Guy, you're sort of making legal news, or at least news for nerds, because you know a lot of the law here, and you know a lot of the people, and as I mentioned, including Mueller. You are predicting tonight, based on what's happened today, that this fight over Donald Trump testifying is going to go all the way to the Supreme Court?
I do. And again, a good point. Mueller, look at Mueller's background. Mueller is a former Marine. He is born and raised in the Department of Justice. He was the chief of the criminal division when I was trying Noriega down here in Miami. And he was aggressive as all get out. He supported us 100% of the time, every step of the way. And it's like the movies that you watch in the old World War II. When you tell the Marine to take the hill, he's going to send in wave after wave after wave, and it's going to get very aggressive and I think messy.
Well, and I believe is the Army never leaves their wounded and the Marines never leave their dead. And Bob Mueller is standing, shoulder to shoulder with every prosecutor on this case that he's assembled. It's quite a team. Let me turn to the congressman and play a little bit of the chorus, the Greek chorus of 2018, if you will, which are Donald Trump's friends, enablers, and loyalists on the news trying to speak to him directly through the camera and say, don't do this interview.
Would you ever let Donald Trump talk to this team that Mueller's put together? I would never allow it.
Absolutely not.
I think he'd be in a better position challenging this legally than sitting down with the special counsel and answering that list of 40-some-odd questions.
I would say, as I have said to other clients, if you want to go down there, I'm going to go stand in the door, and you're going to have to go over my dead body to go down there.
So I'm a recovering lawyer, but it doesn't take a lawyer to know that the central lesson of Watergate is that no one is above the law, not the president, not anybody else. And there's nothing in the Constitution that says the president needs to be treated differently when it comes to routine things like interviews with a prosecutor. And also keep in mind that Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein and Robert Mueller are very aware that the president might fire them. There's all these people asking for them to be fired. And yet they have very strong statements, with Deputy Attorney Rosenstein saying the Justice Department will not be extorted, Mueller threatening this subpoena, which tells me they've got really strong evidence. They believe they got a really strong case. I think that's why they're acting this way.
Guy, do you share that analysis? Because it's certainly true that Rod Rosenstein, who ultimately is Mueller's boss and the key decision maker on what Mueller does that becomes public outside of the indictments themselves, is been, as someone who follows this, to my mind, stronger in public this week than we've ever seen him.
I agree, Ari. I think Rod gives a wit about the threat of being fired. I think Mueller could care less about the threat of being fired. These are two guys that are going to do their job, and they're going to call it like they see it. And they are aggressive prosecutors. They have been aggressive prosecutors, and I think they'll continue to be aggressive prosecutors.
Guy Lewis, Congressman Ted Lieu, and former federal prosecutor Harry Lippman, a very interesting piece of breaking news analysis, as well as a little bit of law school.